Matt's here from North Carolina. Matt studied at Southern Evangelical Seminary, and he's going to be talking a little bit about creation, how it groans, and what we can learn from those things. So thank you, brother.
Yeah.
Appreciate you being here.
Glad to be here. So my talk here will be a bit more on the philosophical end, really thinking about our intuitions about the world, the creation as we see it, and not just from necessarily a Christian or even religious perspective, but looking at more of a even universal human intuition about the world and what we can learn from that. And my contention is going to be that if we listen, that creation is crying out, and it's pointing us to some very significant things about the reality of God and man. And so we will dive in here. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So we have several slides here that are just conveying the beauty of the natural world. I'm guessing this is not something most of us, if anyone here, is going to push back against. But across time, across culture, despite someone's worldview, there is, if not universal, a nearly universal recognition of beauty in the world. Go ahead and continue on. So here we had Vermont fall, this beauty that you guys get to enjoy. We have forests, continue on. Waterfalls, rivers, continue on, oceans. There are all of these natural beauties. Continue on, the night sky, the northern lights, and even these purely natural physics-based phenomena. There's something awe-inspiring, something transcendent about the beauty that we find in the world. Continue on. But the question that we have here is, what is beauty? When we use that word, it's the kind of word that everybody generally knows what you mean when you use it, but when you try to actually give it solid definition, it proves a bit elusive. There's something beyond what we can easily put to words, and yet this is a nearly universal, if not universal, phenomena, this concept. So to help us think about beauty, specifically in physical objects, consider the following three pictures. Our first picture here is paint on cement. Okay. Our second picture, paint on paper. This looks like it could be from one of my children. We have 6 children. They love making art. My oldest could do something much more advanced than that now, but the younger ones, the 3-year-old, the 5-year-old, might be a little more along those lines, but there's something there. And then our third picture, this beautiful landscape that was painted by somebody who has clearly practiced, has gifts and talents and training. So the question, and let's go backwards through them. The question is, what is the difference between picture 1, picture 2, and picture 3? Well, from picture 1 to picture 2, we have the emergence of intentionality, of attempts to create something with purpose, with meaning. So our paint spill on the cement, while we know it's paint, there's nothing beyond the physics of what splattered it in the direction it did, seemingly from falling off a car or something. Okay? With our simple children's finger painting, there's something more here, though it's not what we would typically call beautiful in the fullest terms. There's something that's moving in that direction. And when then we consider the change from our second to our third picture, we've now moved to where many people, perhaps most or even all, would call this painting beautiful. And so there's something in that intentionality that's being communicated. There's something that emerges in all three pictures. We have paint on some sort of surface. And yet there's something qualitatively different about the second and specifically, or more significantly, the third picture. And so it tells us that there's something that is emerging out of these mere physical objects, mere physical paint on a mere physical surface. There's something more. And so even if it proves elusive to say exactly what that is. There's this intuition we have that there's something that's emerging out of. It's more than the physical objects themselves. Well, many, I believe, would contend that when we look at creation, when we consider all of the first pictures that we saw of the trees changing in the fall in Vermont, when we consider a forest scene, when we consider a river, the oceans, the various landscapes, Josh had mentioned the Grand Canyon or the Black Canyon. When we see these things, when we consider the stars at night, when we consider the vastness of the universe, there is an awe and transcendence that comes from our experience of the physical world at times, if not often. And so the question is, what is that? How is it that from mere physical objects, this deeper transcendence emerges? This thing we might call beauty emerges out. It's more than physics in action. There's something more. And in the same way that we know the spilled paint on the cement is different even than the child's finger painting, when we look at this creation, we see the beauty in it. It tells us there's something more going on. There's something behind it. And I would argue it's even pointing to the fact that just as this landscape painting needs a creator, so the beauty in nature needs a creator. It's pointing us to that. Continue on. We could even look at something and think of beauty in a different perspective, a beauty in design. When we think about biological life, even a simple one-cell organism, it's the simultaneous coming into existence of the most complex and efficient information storage system to ever exist, and the tiniest, most efficient factory to ever exist. And it's able to self-replicate. Now, it may not be what you typically think of as beauty, but there's an elegance in design that we can attribute to something we'd call beautiful. And so when we consider that even the most simple organism is a massive amount of information in an unfathomably small amount of space that can redesign, self-replicate, that it's a factory that can produce, this points us to something beyond. Again, it's this transcendence that emerges out. We have mere physical objects, but there's something there with information, with design that says there's something more going on, and that we get the same transcendent sense when we consider it. Continue on. We could speak of a beauty in humanity. Here we have a picture of Mother Teresa serving the poor in India, and we could think of examples perhaps well-known like this, or even within our own lives, when we see humanity caring for one another, when we see humans valuing and caring and sacrificing for one another. There's something about that we could call beautiful. And again, I would contend it's pointing us to a transcendence, that we're more than just sets of molecules floating around this planet, that there's something that is talking about value, an intrinsic value that is within humanity and within the greater creation. And this we could also call beautiful. And so I would contend all of these things, whether we consider the beauty of the landscape, whether we consider the beauty of the elegance of design that we find in creation, or the beauty that can be found within humanity, all of these are pointing us to the transcendent. They're saying there's something more going on than immediately meets the eye. And we have intuitions that don't have to be very well thought out to all come to a very similar conclusion, at least in that basic sense. What we do with that sense becomes significantly varied. But I think it's nearly universal in humanity that we have this sense. Okay, continue on. So how do we explain these intuitions on beauty? Where do they come from? What is it that they're pointing us to? Well, again, I would contend that these are pointing us to the fact that this world was created by a being with intention, that imbued it with value, that gave us the opportunity to be stewards of that creation. However, continue on. I forgot I added these. So these will look familiar. There's a lot of overlap here with what I had developed and what Josh shared. We did not collaborate on this. This was coincidental. But we have several passages that we could go to. So I chose a few. Psalm 19, 1 through 3. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words, whose voice is not heard. Continue on. Romans 1, 19 through 24, Josh shared this as well. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. Next slide. So they are without excuse, for though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. So this gets into the fourth concern that Josh brought up of the danger of elevating creation and worshiping the creation instead of the creator. The inverse of that is abusing the creation and putting ourselves over it in an unhealthy way. And the question, particularly for the Christian, but that I think we have as a witness to the world, is what does it look like to be over creation in a way where we steward it as a resource which God has given, not something to be dominated and destroyed, but to be stewarded and cared for. And this was the call even to Adam and Eve in the garden, to care for it, the creation that God had given. To have dominion does not mean to dominate and destroy. And so we live in a world where, because of a perception of this dominion meaning dominating and destroying, a counter movement has begun where now we worship the creation, and it's the very thing that the author of Romans, Paul, the apostle, warned us of. Continue on. However, we have a significant complication, because in this world filled with beauty, filled with awe, filled with wonder, filled with design, filled with acts of compassion, we also have a flip side, which is disaster, destruction. And so here we have an example of the after effects of a hurricane, and so this is obviously on human settlement, but we have this. Continue on. So whether we consider, tornadoes, avalanches, fires, right, cyclones, hurricanes, floods, droughts, volcanoes, land sinkholes, things like this. These are natural phenomena of the natural world, and yet there's something destructive about them that we have a visceral reaction to. The universal, again, nearly universal intuition when these types of things happen is to say, the world shouldn't be like this. There's something wrong here. The unfortunate side of a group that may try to, the risk of the worship of the creation is almost that we have to master these things. We need to control them. And yet, I would contend they're pointing us to another reality. It's not that the reality about the beauty in the world was false and now we're getting the real story. It's that both of these things are going to exist together. And so this brokenness is the word that I would use in the world is also pointing us to something. Continue on. And so again, from the book of Romans, and this is a little bit longer, but I wanted to conclude most of the quote here. So, for I consider the sufferings of this present age are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. So the promise that God gave throughout the Bible leading up to this in Romans when Paul is sharing after the death of Christ is that the corruption, the decay, the chaos we see in the world is a consequence of the spiritual reality that came when man and his relationship with God was broken. And that this is one of the consequences that manifest in the world in a variety of ways, and yet that was not the original design. But it is not without purpose, because this creation itself, in its brokenness even, is telling us something is wrong. And again, this is a nearly universal human intuition. When we see these things in the world, the universal outcry, even often of the atheist, is this shouldn't happen. The world should not be this way. Often it will be used as a critique against religion in general and Christianity in particular, saying there's no way there can be a God because of these things. The challenge is how to make sense of the fact that we know that the world should be a different way than it is. While that's a standard intuition and something I think nearly everyone would have, when we start to reflect on what has to be true for us to properly have that intuition, for that intuition to be more than just saying, I don't like, but to have something more substantive behind it, many worldviews cannot account for that. Continue on. Jeremiah 17, 9 through 10, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? I, the Lord, search the heart and test the mind, to give every man according to his ways, according to the fruits of his deeds. Continue on. There's another brokenness that we find in the world, which is in humanity. Just as we found beauty in humanity, there's also a brokenness in humanity. There's many different ways we could convey this, whether it's in our current time, even in this country, in this state, or whether we consider history. There are a multitude of ways, some more visceral to us, some more subtle. And yet the brokenness of humanity is all around us, alongside the beauty of humanity, which is also all around us. The beauty of creation, which is all around us, along the brokenness of creation, which is all around us. And how these things come together and what they're pointing us to is what is worth reflection. Continue on. Whether we consider child soldiers, genocide, starvation, hunger, abuse of politics, abuse of class, there's so many different ways that we could discuss this. And so it's not about the particulars here today, but getting that sense of what do these things tell us? How do we make sense of, again, these intuitions that we have? Continue on. So this universal understanding that the world is not the way that it should be. And as an example, I'm going to check my time here quick. Okay. As an example, I was giving a talk. I did a short talk at a university dorm facility to a group of college-age men in South Africa, maybe 50, 60 students. And there was quite a range of worldviews represented, some Christians of varying variation, and then some other religions, and then several atheists who were in the room. And one atheist in particular continued to ask question after question. We went on for about 3.5 hours of open Q&A. And his final sort of, there's no way you can answer this objection. He was quoting some new atheist author. He didn't remember who it was, but he remembered how powerful the statement was and how this convinced him that God wasn't real. So he quoted as best he could remember this statement, which went something like, when I see a child in Africa with his belly swollen and his eye being eaten out by a worm, it's obvious to me that God does not exist. So I said to the student, I said, so then you would agree that that shouldn't happen? And he said, yes. And I'd say, and would you even say that you know for sure that that kind of thing shouldn't exist in this world? And he said, yes. And I said, and would you also agree that you know for sure the world should be a different way? And he said, yes. I said, okay, so now I'd like for you to explain to us how on naturalistic atheism, you know that the world should be a different way than it is. You see, he's identified a problem that his own worldview can't even make sense of. He's right in his intuition that there's something terrible, depraved, bent in that reality. And yet, on his own view, I don't think we could get much beyond saying, I don't like, or that's unfortunate for that person. But to say there's anything more substantial doesn't seem to bear out on his view. He can't make sense of it. And yet, his intuition is not just, well, it's uncomfortable for that child, or I don't like looking at that. His intuition is that there's something broken in this world. The Christian in particular, the theist perhaps in general, does not have a problem saying, you're right. That doesn't make it easy or comfortable. I'm not here to say that at all. I'm not saying that as a Christian we don't have the challenge of trying to make sense out of the evil, the corruption of the world, and how is it fair? We get this sense of that doesn't seem fair. And that is still a hard thing to deal with. But many views can't even make sense of the fact that we have this universal intuition that there's something wrong with that situation. Next slide. So a comprehensive view, and I wanted to leave time for questions, so I think we were going to do that successfully. So a comprehensive view that can make sense of all these intuitions must explain how we can recognize the beauty and the transcendent beauty that comes out of the world. Perhaps we could even add into that the design, the beauty of design in the world and the beauty within humanity. It has to make sense of how we can know for sure that the world should be a different way than it is. It would have to be able to explain that the world was created in a way without this brokenness in it, and this brokenness is an evil that has invaded the world, that it was not a part of the original design. I think it must, or at least have some way of making at least some sense of the felt evil in the world. And I think there's a danger in trying to get to the point where we're answering any particular experience of evil. Well, here's exactly why that's allowed. There's this particular other thing that's coming out of it. I think that is a dangerous road to go down. Yet what I can say for sure is that our experience of evil is one of the clearest things that points us to what, if Christianity is true in particular, is our ultimate problem. It's not a physical problem, it's a spiritual problem. And that this spiritual broken relationship between God and man, which manifests in a broken relationship between man and his fellow man and the creation he was meant to be a steward over, is manifest in a variety of ways. And yet, if Christianity is true, and if many religions would be pointing to some version of this, but Christianity, I think, most robustly, that our ultimate biggest problem is this broken relationship with God. And if that is the case, then there can be at least some good redemptive value in anything that points us towards that. So just as the beauty in creation points us towards that transcendent, towards something more behind this world, this universe, so the brokenness points us to the transcendent, that there's some way this should be that it's not. Something has happened. Quoting C.S. Lewis, perhaps paraphrasing slightly, I may not have the exact quote memorized, but he says something along the lines in The Problem of Pain, that God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks to us in our conscience, but shouts to us in our pain. And that pain is a megaphone to rouse a dead and sleeping world. And we can see this. We think about whether it's something done by humans, 9/11 or a natural disaster, or whatever it might be, when we have these seemingly identified acts of evil in the world, whether natural or human-made, the experience of a lot of people is to cry out to God or to challenge and ask God, why would you allow this? But in both cases, there's something that it pushes us beyond this world. We can't be content in our consumerism, in our comfort, in our homes, in whatever we may have. There's something about pain, there's something about suffering that makes us deal with that which we could otherwise dismiss. Now, we may live in a unique time where that can happen more easily than other points in history or other parts of the world because of the comforts that we enjoy. And while they're a blessing, they also become a curse in another way. And so, but Christianity, I believe, can at least explain that there is some redemptive value to evil in general, in that it is pointing us, and it is kind of the final undeniable, or has to be willfully denied, reminder, signal, warning that there's something wrong that needs set right. The next is, how do we deal with the action? Oh, sorry, go back. Sorry, the next point. How do we deal with the actions, these evil actions that are happening in the world? And so I had a picture of the Holocaust, and there was a point where I would have considered myself an atheist and had certain challenges, questions. And one thing that was very dissatisfying to me as an atheist was, what do you do about the injustice, especially gross injustice in the world? These evil things that have been done by evil people. Now, I didn't think I was one of them, but someone like Hitler was. And I remember one time a group of Christians were trying to convince me I wouldn't need to believe in hell. I could still be a Christian and not believe in hell. Now, I have no idea why they were bringing this up, because I hadn't said anything that would lead that way. But I shocked them substantially when I said, well, if you got rid of hell, what reason would there be to be a Christian? And they were very confused, looking at one another. And I said, look, hell is one of the best things you have going for you. Because think of it this way. I don't think there is a God. I don't think there is any sort of judgment. This was at the time, obviously. And I have to just say, Hitler did all these heinous things, was responsible for murdering all of these people, leading all these other people into destructive ideologies, and then he dies. So what? Do you know how dissatisfying that is? I said, I have this overwhelming sense that there's something wrong and unjust about that. And yet I have no way to set that straight. So if you get rid of hell, now, I'm not trying to say hell is a comfortable, easy thing. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to make too much light of it. But what it gets to is, again, another intuition that we have, that there needs to be some sort of justice, reconciliation to the evil, especially the human evil done in this world. Well, many, again, views have no ability to make sense of that intuition, let alone to have any sort of answer to it. Yet if Christianity is true, we have a God who knows all, who is upholding all, and who will judge all. Now, how exactly he does that, how that plays out, I'm going to trust him with. I don't think we can fully understand it. But there is a judgment. That is the point. And while that's scary on one hand, there's something that we actually can enjoy or admire about it in another. Now, we may not like it if it turns on us, but we have no problem identifying people like Hitler that most humans would agree that it should qualify to. Okay, the discussion of how it applies to us, that's a whole other topic we'll have to save for another time. The last thing is the restoration of the world. So again, if we have this sense that the world should be a different way, that it was meant to not be like this, and yet it is, then, well, how is it redeemed? And as Josh was sharing from Douglas Moo, there is one way or another, whether it's a recreation or a redemption of this world or a hybrid of both, and it's talking about the same thing. There is on Christianity a way in which this will all be set straight, that there will be a place with no more pain or sorrow, tears, no more suffering, no more brokenness, no more evil. Evil will have been dealt with and contained. And so any view, I would argue, any robust view must be able to make sense out of all of these things. And very few worldviews can even make a reasonable attempt at any one of them, let alone all of them in conjunction. And I would contend that Christianity, though it's not necessarily comfortable or easy admitting all of these, that it does the best job of giving us that explanatory scope to make sense of these universal human intuitions we have about the world, about its beauty, about its brokenness, about evil, about the need for judgment and justice and reconciliation and redemption. And that in Christianity, all of those things come together. Last slide. But keeping in mind that if Christianity is true, and I genuinely believe it is. I think we have good evidence and proof of that. Again, that's a whole other topic. But if Christianity is true, we don't have a God that remains distant and watches us suffer and then judges us. But we have a God who entered into space and time in the person of Jesus. And Isaiah 53, in talking about this suffering servant that Jesus came to fulfill, says he was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace. and with his wounds we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray and have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. So I would appeal to you that not only can Christianity make sense out of all of these intuitions we have, that it can bring a resolution, but we have a God who came and entered in and was willing through the person of Christ to suffer amongst us and to suffer for us and to redeem us through his death and his victorious resurrection. And that in doing so, he proved not that he was there to conquer the Romans, but he was there to conquer sin and death, and that he will one day set all things right, and there will be a judgment for all of these, and that we can enter into that redemptive world that will be created through trusting in him. And I would encourage you, if you have not considered that, to do that today. If you have, consider how do you share that with others, because this is not, while the particulars might be foreign to people, there are, again, these intuitions that everyone has that are pointing them in that direction. It's connecting the dots and helping them to see how this makes sense out of all of it. All right, with that, I'm going to stop. I think we have time for a couple of questions, maybe. So I know that's a lot. I probably covered maybe a little too much, but I had to touch on all of that, I felt. So hopefully you found that valuable. And I'm willing to discuss throughout the day in our free time anything further if you're not comfortable asking here. But again, any questions or comments or thoughts, you're free to share. Means it was either really good or really bad. All right, well, yeah, good. Okay.
Tie this into creation care.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. I probably hadn't done that quite as well as I would like. So I think at a minimum, what this is telling us is, if you are someone who would call yourself a Christ follower, that how you interact with creation, and we could call this the natural world or the human creation, that is going to tell people a lot about what you value. It's going to say a lot about your value system. And whether you like it or not, you are representing God. You are representing Christ. And so to do that well is to be a good steward. And so while we have the risk and the danger, we don't want to go to the side of extremism where what we're functionally telling people is this world's what it's all about. We also don't want to go to the other extreme, for sure, of saying that this world is irrelevant. It is something to be abused. And so the way that we care for and enjoy creation with others, whether they consider themselves a believer, a follower of God, a follower of Christ or not, we can use that as a way to show the love and care that we have for the creation God has given us. I think there's something appealing in that. I imagine for those of you who are believers here, many of your neighbors probably care for creation. They have these intuitions about what we would call creation. They may not call it that. They may just call it the environment or nature. But there's something in that that you can tap into. But if all you have are words telling them what they should believe, but they don't see anything in your actions of what you do, it's a hollow message. It may be a true message, but it's a hollow message. And unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, there's positives and negatives to this. Humans, while we're rational animals, that would be Aristotle's definition, while we are reasoning creatures, we often make most of our decisions more on emotion than we do on well-thought-out reason. And so the logic of what you say may be sound, but if the action of the words of your actions don't match, people will not listen to you. And that is what you will see. And so, again, we don't want to go so far that what we're communicating is an alarmism or elevating the creation as though it's the thing to be worshipped, but a proper stewardship, a proper care of creation will be perhaps not evidence to make somebody believe, but can give you that ground on which to speak to somebody who would otherwise maybe not listen. So that's what I would say. Now, we're not doing it merely for that, right? I think we have a mandate to care for the creation God has put us as stewards over, that should be happening anyways. But the practical value from the standpoint of the Great Commission, if you would consider that, is in doing so with at least some people, if not many, you will gain some credibility to speak and share these ultimate truths of what you think the creation is pointing towards. Is that fair? Any other questions? Sometimes you just got to get the first question out of the way because nobody wants to ask the first question. I have a professor that he does a lot of Q&As, and he always starts out and says, all right, nobody likes to ask the first question, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the second one. And then everyone laughs, and then often the students or whoever it is will start asking questions finally. So, but again, if you're not comfortable now, feel free to come up and talk to me later, ask questions, whatever. I'm happy to help and serve. However, I'll also be here tomorrow morning. We'll do a sermon related to this topic, tied in, looking at that passage in Romans 8 a little bit more. And then we're going to be doing something tomorrow afternoon, evening. So I'll be here all weekend. So if you have anything you want to share, I'm happy to do what I can to help.